Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. As always, we get the data from UntapGG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client. Tracks your win rates, aggregates with other users, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. Link is in the video description if you want to get started. I'll also post all the deck lists in the video description along with timestamps so you can jump ahead, see what you want to get those deck lists. Each of them I'll give a blurb in terms of what the deck's doing, and then any changes week over week in terms of the evolution of some of the more static decks. As always, if you can, drop a like and comment on the video. It's free, easy, helps out the channel's growth. We are closing in on 10,000 subs on the channel, so any support is appreciated. So we are going to look at first the meta kind of breakdown, and then we'll look at the week that was. We're going to look Diamond and Mythic rank for this particular video. So despite this like date range, we're just looking at popularity today. So mono white human, so like the white based human aggro decks. Burn's very popular. So basically the difference between burn and mono red aggro and mono red burn. Burn is usually the mechanized warfare versions of the deck, where mono red aggro is the more creature kind of thundering Raiju version of the deck. Selesnya Enchantments, a very popular deck. Mono blue, got Soldiers, Azorius Control, and then Gruul Aggro. Normally we don't focus so much on the win rate today, but it was actually kind of interesting to see Gruul being quite high today, whereas like Selesnya Enchantments down at 26%. So like 10% popularity, but like just having a really rough. Who's ever sleeving up Enchantments today is having a bad day on the ladder. I think they need to switch decks, but we'll jump into it. So we are, sorry about that, looking June 26th through to July 3rd. Happy Canada Day to my Canadian folks. Happy 4th of July to the US. And I don't know if there's any other long weekend festivities across the world this weekend, but Diamond and Mythic rank, 66,000 games played. So Esper Legends is the highest win rate deck. It's doing this again, but it was 65% win rate of the deck. So there's a few different versions of the deck itself. You'll sometimes see a wedding announcement in it, just more creature versions. This version's actually not playing any copies of Thalia, which is quite interesting. So opting to go with a spell heavier version, both make disappear and go for the throat, full 4-ofs of both of these. So you have Scroll to protect your things. Rona can tap and tap to draw cards based on you casting legendaries. But the big engine of the deck is Rafine Scheming Seer, which will draw you cards, throws things in the bin, lets you connive. You can get stuff back from the graveyard with like Denix flip side, gains you a whole bunch of life with Shelly. You got like Urtai's removal, Gix draws you more cards and creatures deal damage as well. Plaza Heroes fixes your mana base, fixes your colors, provides protection, and then you got a bunch of the channel lands for value in the deck as well. From there, we go to mono red aggro. So in Diamond and Mythic rank, the Raiju version, the creature heavier version, is a higher win rate, 64%. So what we're seeing is a lot of these decks now, at least in best of one, are playing some numbers of Strangle, it seems, in the main board. It just gives you another cheap interaction point. So now you have basically 6 1-mana burn spells plus the lightning strike, so 10 total burn spells that you can use to deal with your opponent's creatures, so very efficient removal. That can then be flashback as well with the Bloodthirsty Adversary. Squee as well as Raiju as your hasty kind of closeout creatures, both if they are left unchecked, kind of run away with the game. Feldon is a virtual card advantage if it's stealth damage. Then you got like your Kumanos, and then your other 1-drops in Swift Spear and Phoenix Chick. Interesting. So sometimes you'll see Mishra's Foundry. I actually don't love Mishra's Foundry in the mono red that much, because you have so many 1-drops, it at times could prevent you from double spelling on turn 2. This is just a very clean mana base here. From there, we go to Naya Humans, 62% win rate. So I'm going to put the Naya Humans and the mono white beside each other, even though mono white wasn't the next in terms of win rate, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of the cards of the deck. So this is a human-based aggressive deck. You have Hopeful Initiate as your 1-drops, Scrolls for protection, Copper Coat Vanguard that gives your creatures a boost in power, as well as Ward. The Intrepid Adversary is your lord in this type of deck, bumps up your power of creatures, and the lifelink could be decent in terms of racing. Malira is used as a protection spell. It can get your creatures back if they die. It's also just a decent body, being a 2-mana 3/3. You have Thalia for tax. Valor Stance is either removal for big things or protection. Then you have your Adelins that can just make a bunch of creatures. Brutal Cathars, removal. Then you have your top end, Halana and Alana, makes all your other creatures that you cast. Could get Virtual Haste, and then just put counters on things, gets really big creatures. And then the Sigarda, Champion of Light, as a way to get an evasive body, another Lord effect, and then with the Coven ability, gives you an ability to draw cards from your deck. Generally speaking, these kind of creature decks lack that ability to replenish your hand. And then you got the Plaza Heroes as well as Secluded Courtyard playing into the human theme to allow you to cast these off-color cards. If we compare that to the mono-white version, so just a slight percentage change different. Mono-white has a cleaner mana base, less potential for tap lands, as all the lands come into play untapped, where you can have some of the fast lands come into play untapped later in the game. So you have your Hopeful Initiate still, but we also get access to Recruitment Officer here. Draws you cards as a way as a late game mana sink. Your Vanguards, a couple copies of Guardian of New Benalia in the Malaris spot here, somewhat harder to kill creature, and then you're getting access to still your Adelins, Brutal Cathars, but your Peacekeeper as a way to tax your opponent's hand, paired with Knight Errant of Eos that can allow you to tap your creatures to draw cards. You have a number of creatures in the deck that have Vigilance, which is nice because generally this Knight Errant of Eos makes you kind of think, do I want to attack or do I want to draw the cards? But with the Vigilance creatures, you can attack in, and then post-combat, you can tap them for the Knight Errant. This version is on Wanagonjo and the Mishra's Foundry. We then go to Azorius Control, and this is an interesting one. It's kind of more Azorius Mill. So you have Teresian Mindbreaker. So it's a 7-mana 6/4. When it attacks, defending player mills half their library. But in this deck, it's more likely than not that you will have this in your graveyard through cards like the Faithful Mending or the Day-Night Cycle with Celestis. And then you can unearth it from your graveyard for 4 mana, and it gets haste, so you can mill them out that way. You pair that with the Jace, the -X, which can, if you cast it for 4 mana, mills 15 cards on its own. So it's a fairly quick clock to mill. With the deck itself, you got 4 Sunfalls on the top end as your sweeper, Wandering Emperor's removal, Memory Deluge as a way to find your key pieces, some Dissipates as counter, Sunset Reveille as a way to gain some life, give you some blockers, and potentially draw you cards, and then just a smattering of removal, Elspeth Smite, March of the Whirly Light, Soul Partition. Faithful Mending also happens to gain life, which can buy you a couple turns here and there. From one end of Azorius to the other, we go to the more aggressive spectrum with the Soldiers deck, and this has pretty much been the configuration for the last couple of weeks. The more aggressive slanted version, you got your Resolute Reinforcements, the Harbins, basically no non-creature spells, just really lean mean. You get a Valiant Veteran as a Lord effect, Harbin as a way to give your soldiers flying and a boost in terms of power if you attack with 5 or more. The Myrel is just a really big threat to just kind of spawn more creatures. The one thing I'd probably say, I'd probably go 2 Myrels for Skystrike Officers, just kind of drop one of these, add another one. The Skystrike Officer is like your only real card advantage in this deck. And you can get, we're seeing like more decks kind of have either more removal or sweepers in board stalls. This just allows you to keep drawing cards as well as being another flyer. It helps in terms of just having another evasive body. The deck is using a bunch of utility lands, including the Fortified Beachhead as a way to pump your team as well when they're attacking in. We then go to aforementioned Selesnya Enchantments. So having a bad day today, but still fairly decent win rate at 58%. So the deck's kind of built around a couple key cards. Your Jukai Naturalist reduces the cost of the enchantments you cast. Generous Visitor puts counters on 2 creatures whenever you cast an enchantment, similar to Calyx, where it's an enter the battlefield, not a cast trigger though. And then Calyx lets you potentially copy your non-legendary enchantment whenever Calyx itself deals damage or an enchanted creature. The enchanted creature would be likely with Audacity in this case. Mishiko gives a buff to your team. Kami gets bigger whenever you cast enchantments. Ossification is removal, along with Seal to Existence. The Spirited Companion for card draw, as well as Weaver to double like any of the triggers from your enchantments. Version's also on Invasion of Theros. So I'd like this usually as a 2 of. It is a little bit slow at times, especially into the more aggressive decks, because you are effectively taking a turn off in most cases. to cast this. So if you can't flip it that same turn, then you run a little bit of a risk. But it lets you tutor for an aura in this case, because you're not playing any gods. So your auras in the deck are either Ossification or the Audacity. So removal or pump. And then when it flips over, it becomes Farah, one of the gods, has lifelink and indestructible as long as you control 3 other enchantments. And then whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So kind of that enchantress ability that we see in more eternal formats as a way to replenish. So it's very good once it flips, but it's just a matter of, can you survive long enough and can you attack into it? From there, we go to mono black control, mono black mid-range, 55-56% win rate. And this version's got a bunch of different removal spells. You got cut downs, go for the throats, left it to Shiro as a way to either pump, minus creatures on your opponent's side, or gain you life, then becomes a creature that can ramp you up. You got Sheoldred's Edict, creatures in like Evolve Sleeper that you could sink mana into. Tenacious Underdog keeps coming back from your graveyard. Graveyard Trespasser to eat away at your opponent's graveyard, gain you some life. Lily for hand hate. Soul Transfers, catch-all removal. This version's on an Invasion of Zendikar. Just a flash-in removal spell that can then be flipped, and then you get to kind of have a mana sink to make zombies. Obliterator, Sheoldred split, so interesting split there. Obliterator is very good into some of the decks into the format, but then fairly weak into the others, so kind of the disparity of Obliterator. When it's good, it's great. When it's bad, it's pretty mediocre. But if, like, even against some of the mono white decks, their only removal is the Brutal Cathar, so you can sometimes get them that way there. You have Gix Command as a sweeper, lifelink, rebuy stuff, and then Sheoldred as an edict style effect. The one thing I would say is you probably want a 25th line in this deck. Your curve's fairly high. Between the numbers of 4s and 5s, and 24 lands is pretty low. I'd also probably say, I understand you're on Obliterator, but I would probably play like 1 copy of the Myrex, maybe 2. It's very good into kind of the grindier matchups where just keep making creatures. And then lastly, one of the highest win rate decks of the day at 58%, not heavily played, is the Gruul Aggro deck. So 54% overall. It is basically mono red splash green for Samut. So Samut, 3 mana, 2/3, first strike, vigilance, haste. Nice keywords there. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, if that creature entered the battlefield this turn, you get to draw a card. So it is card advantage in mono red. So you're playing a number of haste creatures. Pretty much everything you play can come into play and attack immediately. The tokens that Squee makes each turn can trigger it. You have a Maya, the other green spell, just decent body with haste. Your Feldins, Bloodthirsties, your burn package, but in addition, this one's playing Shivan Devastator as another way to have an evasive body that can draw you cards. Cool little interaction. Play this on 1. By turn 3, if you cast this on curve, this flips, and because when it re-enters the battlefield as the flip side, since it transforms, that would trigger Samut as well. So a nice kind of synergy there with the deck. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been thinking about Standard. If you've been enjoying it, you got anything under the radar. And we'll catch you next week. We'll try to get through all the videos this week. It was the long weekend for Canada, and I will be dog sitting this week, so try to get out as much content as possible. However, maybe a little bit slower for this week. In any case, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.